Should be good.
Okay. Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. Shavua Tov and Chodesh Tov. Welcome to our regular Tzomam Rabbanan Shiur, which we are. Today is the first of two special shiurim dealing with Hilchot Pesach. It's good to prepare ourselves. We'll be preparing ourselves physically. We need to prepare ourselves spiritually as well in terms of Pesach. And this year, as I mentioned on Friday night, for those who are here, there are 4 words that strike dread in every Jewish heart, in every Jewish home. And those 4 words are Erev, Pesach, Shechal, v'Shabbat. That's the situation that we have this year. The good news is that Erev Pesach, Shechal, v'Shabbat is not going to happen again for another 20 years. The better news is that when you understand what is involved in Erev Pesach, Shechal, v'Shabbat, it's actually not as complicated. It's actually not as terrifying as many people seem to think that it is. And the truth is that there are many opportunities and that this brings. Now, I once heard from a certain Dayan in London, he said, we have to change the language that we speak in. We have to stop talking about challenges, about difficulties. We have to start talking about opportunities. Exactly. The example that he gave, he was talking before Rosh Hashanah. And he said many people get scared off by these days when they talk about Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. He said, don't call them days of awe, call them days of opportunity. So I like that. So I want to suggest that Erev Pesach Shechal v'Shabbat is not a Pesach of awe, but it's a Pesach of opportunity. And we'll talk about exactly why. First of all, and we'll get into the halachot one by one, we'll break it all down. First of all, there's a lot of confusion about what happens and what's meant to happen and how it's meant to happen, and we'll go through that. Truth is, I even saw one of the publications that I won't say which one, but one of the publications that was made had a special section. It had on the front cover. It had it there. It said Erev Shabbat on Pesach. And I was looking at it. I was like, Erev Shabbat on Pesach. It was always Erev Shabbat on Pesach. They meant to say Erev Pesach on Shabbat, right? Why do we say Erev Pesach, Shechal Shabbat? Why do we just say Pesach on Motzei Shabbat? Maybe the answer is because Pesach on Motzei Shabbat is not actually that complicated. Once we get to Pesach, it's pretty straightforward. There are a few things we have to know, right? The fact that Pesach is on Motzei Shabbat means we can't do any preparation from Shabbat to Pesach. It's going to be a little bit later. We have to do things in advance. We have to wait until we can set the table, etc. We'll get to that. But really, the complication is when it comes to Shabbat before Pesach. Now we spoke on Shabbat as well. On Friday night, those who were here, I mentioned a story in the Gemara. Amazing story in the Gemara Pesachim. Talks about a year when Erev Pesach fell on Shabbat. Again, and we know it comes in waves. The last one was a few years ago. Again, it won't happen again for another 20 years. Sometimes it's more common, sometimes it's less common. But there was a time when it had not happened for a while. And the Gemara says they wanted to know, again, a question which does not concern us nowadays. Hopefully it will. Mizrat Hashem, very, very soon it will concern us again. But at the moment, it doesn't really concern us, the question of the Korban Pesach. Right? In the Torah, by the way, there are 2 different chagim. There's Chag Pesach and Chag HaMatzot. When we talk about Pesach now, we're referring to the 7 days of the Chag, but actually that's not Pesach. That's Chag HaMatzot. But Pesach is the Korban Pesach, which is brought the day before, and you done it, right? What we call Erev Pesach, that in itself, in the days of the Beit HaMikdash, Erev Pesach itself is somewhat of a Yom Tov. You can't do Melacha before Chatzot, after Chatzot, whatever, because everybody has to bring a Korban. So there the Gemara gets, I don't want to get into it, we discussed on Friday night, but the Gemara has a question. It says, can you bring the Korban Pesach on Erev Shabbat? Normally it's a weekday. But what happened when Erev Shabbat, on Erev Pesach? See, even I'm confused. But on Erev Pesach, which is normally a weekday, when it fell on Shabbat, and the Gemara says nobody knew what to do, and they went around, they said, there's a Bavli here, his name is Hillel, and Hillel learned Bashmaya Naftalion, the Gdolei Ador, and they asked him, and he gave the answer, and they were so impressed, and they appointed him as the Nasi. Right, fascinating story, and we could talk about it for a long time, but we won't. So that is Erev Pesach on Shabbat. And like I say, people tend to panic. People tend to panic when they hear about this. I remember the last time this happened was 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I was in London, I was on Shlichut, and Erev Rosh Hashanah, I get a phone call from somebody in the community. It's Rabbi, I'm looking at the calendar. What do we do on Erev Pesach? Said, let me get through Rosh Hashanah first. Or what do you think that? But what do we do with Chametz and how do we have Sudash Leishit? It's Erev Rosh Hashanah. What are you thinking about Pesach? Why don't we like to plan ahead? But okay, so like I say, people tend to panic. We don't need to panic. And let me just say, we'll talk about opportunities. And there are a few advantages to the fact that the Seder takes place on Motzei Shabbat. I've heard from many people, especially, in Chutz La'aretz, where you have the Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiot. So everybody complains about the truth is according to some understandings in the Gemara, you should complain. We're not meant to have the second day. It's maybe some sort of a punishment, whatever. But people say the one thing they really, really like is Pesach, because the first day you're so tired, and the first night, and you have the Seder. The second night you have another Seder, then you can really, really enjoy it. So this year we have the opportunity. Normally, Erev Pesach, you're running around all day, and everybody's hungry because there's nothing to eat. And we have Erev Shabbat, when we finish doing everything, and we finish getting rid of, and then we have Shabbat, and we have to daven early on Shabbat. We'll talk about it, and you have time, extra time. You can rest. And you have extra time that you can learn, and as a family, you can sit together and you can go through the Haggadah, and then you come into Pesach, and it's later, yes, but it's Motzei Shabbat. We're going not from Chol into Kodesh, but we're going from the Kedusha of Shabbat into the Kedusha of Pesach. It is a different experience. It's a different opportunity that we have to experience the Kedusha of Leil HaSeder, and that is something we can look forward to. Okay, so let's go through it. We'll break it down. We'll work chronologically in terms of all the different issues that come up. Now, the unique issues that come up with Pesach being on Motzei Shabbat, or Erev Pesach being on Shabbat. The first one that we encounter is, of course, the Ta'anit B'chorim. For those who are firstborn, or for those who have firstborn children, and we have to fast on their behalf, it will surprise you to know that there are three different opinions here as to when the Ta'anit takes place. Normally, the Ta'anit takes place on Erev Pesach. This year, Erev Pesach being Shabbat. As we know, we don't fast on Shabbat. There are three different opinions. One opinion says that you can't fast on Shabbat, but you bring it forward one day. You bring it forward to Friday. Normally, we don't fast on Friday for various reasons, with the exception of Asara B'Tevet. But for example, Tanit Esther, actually, if it's brought forward, we don't have it on Friday, we have it on Thursday. One opinion says the Tanit would still take place on Friday. One opinion says, since the Tanit cannot take place in its normal time, it's pushed off completely, and that there is no Tanit B'Chorim this year. And then there is a third opinion which says, no, we bring it forward. We can't have it on Friday, but we have it on Thursday instead. That is the prevalent opinion. That is the accepted halacha, that the Ta'anit takes place on Thursday. Also, part of the accepted halacha is that basically nobody fasts this fast. We rely on a siyum, but the nafkamina is that we would have to have the siyum on Thursday morning. So if you're planning on making the siyum, you have one less day to learn. We make the siyum on Thursday morning, and that would be the Ta'anit. Okay. Then we get to B'dikat Chametz, Bi'ur Chametz, and Mechirat Chametz this year. So when it comes to B'dikat Chametz, checking for the Chametz, of course, we're all checking for Chametz now. We have a whole month that we are cleaning our homes, etc. I went on Shabbat, I went down to the children's service, and I said to the kids, have you all started helping cleaning for Pesach? And they all looked at me. No. So maybe not, but now it's Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we're starting to...
They're on the other team.
They're on the other team, yeah. That's right. They're the ones that you're cleaning and they're walking around scattering all the chametz. That's okay. But we have the ceremony, quote unquote, of B'dikat Chametz, which we do the night before Pesach. Usually we go around with a candle. We have the 10 pieces. We've been talking about it between Mincha and Maariv. All the shiurim are available online. And the problem we have this year is that the night before Pesach is Shabbat. Could you do B'dikat Chametz on Shabbat? So technically speaking, if you're just going around and looking for Chametz, technically speaking, you could do that on Shabbat. We can't do it on Shabbat because we go with a candle, right? You have to have a candle or a torch if you use flashlight, and that you cannot do. There are those who discuss. They say maybe the candle itself would be muktzah, which is a isur d'Rabbanan. Right, and then you have a mitzvah, you have a takana of doing the chametz, and maybe it's aseh or chelot aseh. There is a cheshbon hilchati that we could do to see if it's possible. But bottom line is we don't do the b'dikat chametz on the night before on Shabbat. We bring it forward an extra night. So Thursday night is a night we'll say b'dikat chametz. We do it as we would in any other year. We still say the bracha. The bracha is al biur chametz. Normally, there's a halacha. If somebody leaves their home within 30 days of Pesach, and you're going to be somewhere else, you still have to do B'dikat Chametz in your home the night before you leave. But since it's not Erev Pesach, you would not say the bracha. Here, even though it's not Erev Pesach, it's still, this is the time that Chachamim established that everyone has to do the B'dikat. So we say the bracha when we do B'dikat Chametz on Thursday night, and we would do the B'dikat Chametz as usual. Where does the change come in as well? is that when we finish doing Bdikat Chametz, you remember we do Bitul Chametz. Bitul Chametz, which is a declaration that we make. One has to understand, one has to know what they're saying. You can say it in whatever language you understand. If you don't understand the Hebrew or the Aramaic, you can say it in English. That's fine. In fact, it's probably better to say it in English if that's what you understand. So we do that in normal years. We do that twice. We do the Bitul Chametz once at night when we finish doing the Bdika. And then we say we are nullifying, we're doing bitul on any chametz that we don't know about. Because we still want to have our chametz for breakfast the next morning. In the morning, when we burn the chametz, then we say bitul again. And then we say the bitul on any chametz that we know about or that we don't know about, anything that might have been left over. We want that to be nullified. We want that not to be ours anymore. So we do b'dikar chametz the same time that we normally do. We do bi'ur chametz. Now, in a normal year, we have to do it by the end of the 5th hour on Erev Pesach. Now, you'll say to me, we're not doing it on Erev Pesach. Clearly, we can't do Biur Chametz on Shabbat because we're burning the Chametz. So we do it the day before. We do it on Friday. But we can still eat Chametz the entire day of Friday. It's not Erev Shabbat yet. It's not Erev Pesach yet. It's Erev Shabbat. It's not Erev Pesach. And we'll see in a moment, we're still going to be eating Chametz on Shabbat morning. Okay, certainly on Friday night. So you might say, well, what difference does it make? I can burn the chametz whatever time I want. I can do it 5 minutes before Shabbat. We'll all come to shul for mincha. Before mincha, we'll have a big bonfire outside, and then we'll burn out chametz. What's the problem with that? Even though the next time's only in 20 years. The problem with that is that if you're going to burn it later, when we were making the schedule for Pesach and all the times, what's the first thing we do? We look at last year's schedule, right? We remember how did we do it in the past? So people will say, last year, we burned the chametz just before mincha. So let's burn the chametz just before mincha. But if it's Erev Pesach, you can't do that. It's already too late. So therefore, in order not to get confused, we still burn the chametz in the morning and the regular time that we would every other year. It's a little bit strange because you can then still go home and you can eat the chametz. We'll talk about what we can eat. But that's what we do. And the difference is, now normally, when we burn the chametz, we do biur chametz, we also say that formula of bitul, the second one. So here, we can't say the bitul. Because if we say the bitul and nullifying, we still have chametz at home. We still want to eat it. So we have to remember to say the bitul chametz on Shabbat before the 5th hour. Okay, so that's the first big change. This is something we have to remember. On Shabbat morning, even though we're not doing the Sreifat chametz, we've already burnt it the day before, whatever chametz that we had left, when we finished eating our chalaz or our lechem mishnah, we'll get to shortly, then we have to say the formula of bitul chametz, that we have to say on Shabbat. The other thing that one has to remember, whatever chametz I'm leaving over for Shabbat, if I have lechem mishnah, if I have rolls or pitot or whatever, make sure that it's all, especially if you have kids at home because they're on the other team, right? Make sure that you have it wrapped up, that you have it in one place. After I've done the b'tikat chametz, I still have a little bit of chametz that I'm leaving over in my house. I need it to be one place, not to be dispersed, because otherwise there's no meaning to the fact that I've searched for chametz and gotten rid of it if I'm putting it all back in the cupboards, etc. Okay, so that's essentially b'tikat chametz, bitul chametz, and biur chametz. Let me just talk about mechirat chametz, then I'll break if there's any questions, if anything's not clear. But when it comes to mechirat chametz now, we have a couple of issues that we don't have in a normal year. So when does the mechirat take place? So normally, again, Erev Pesach, the rule is up to 4 hours in the day we're allowed to still eat chametz. Up to 5 hours we're allowed to get benefit from it, and that's the time when we burn it. So before the time that the isur, the prohibition of chametz, kicks in, that is when the sale takes effect. Again, starting from today until Erev Pesach, everybody's coming, you're signing the forms with the rabbi to sell your chametz. That is not the act of sale. I've said it many, many times. I'll keep saying it again because people still get confused. Every year, people come up to me and say, Rabbi, can I sell you my chametz? And my answer is always, no, absolutely not. I don't want to have the responsibility of owning your chametz, but you can appoint me as a shaliach and we'll sell your chametz to the rabbanut. That's fine. That's what we do. The person has to understand what they're doing. So we're doing all of that now, but you're signing the forms now. But when the actual kinyan, the actual sale takes place, that is on Erev Pesach. So what happens in this year when Erev Pesach is Shabbat? So there are those that we can't go and do the signing and on Shabbat. There's really a question, are we allowed to perform a kinyan? Are we allowed to make sales, make acquisitions on Shabbat? Not so clear. So there are those who say, look, what happens is the rabbanut will sell on Friday, and they will put in the stipulation that the sale itself will only come into effect on Shabbat morning. That is one approach. A second approach, which is probably a more common approach, is that no, the sale will take place on Friday. Now, again, we don't have the same limitations. You'll say to me, Rabbi, you just told me we have to burn the chametz in the morning because we'll get confused about other years. So say, look, it's not every person who's going and selling the chametz. It's the Rabbanut Rashit. The chief rabbis, we're not so concerned, hopefully, that the chief rabbis will forget what to do next year, right? They can do the sale. If they do the sale later in the day, or they do the sale in the morning to come into effect before Shabbat, that's fine. But what's the problem? The problem is if I'm selling all my chametz, and again, we want this to be serious. We don't want it to be disingenuous. It's not a shir about mechirat chametz now. I'm not going into all the details, but whatever chametz I have that's left over that I, for whatever reason, do not rely on biur, do not rely on bitul, I want to sell it. On Friday night and on Shabbat morning, we've got some rolls that are left over that we want to eat for lechem mishnah. If I'm selling, including those in the sale, something here is disingenuous. So what is done, and you'll see when the forms that I've prepared for you, and you'll see the sale that's done by the Rabbanut, is that we'll say we are selling all the chametz with the exclusion of there's a certain amount, right? When I'm going and selling something, I can exclude. I have this bunch of rolls that I'm going to use for lechem mishnah on Shabbat. I explained to the non-Jew what lechem mishnah is, right? And that's not included. But the rest of the chametz I'm selling. Okay, that's fine. No problem with that. You can stipulate what's included and what's not included. So that chametz that we still want to use on Shabbat, that we would have to, that would not be part of the sale. Okay, so just to summarize what we've said until this point. Dikat chametz takes place on Thursday night. It's a night earlier, but it takes place as usual. We say the bracha. We do every other year. Sreifat chametz takes place on Friday morning. The difference is, after I've burnt the chametz, I still have chametz in my house. Technically speaking, the whole of Friday afternoon, if I want to eat chametz, I can eat chametz. Again, be careful where you are, crumbs, etc. But I'm keeping that. And the bitul that I would normally say when I burn the chametz, I don't say then, but I have to say it on Shabbat before the time that's the latest time when I can own the chametz. Okay, which is a little bit later than the time I can eat the chametz. Yeah.
Is that literally the language in the sense that once Shabbat starts, the only thing you can have is your lechem mishnah, or what's the exclusionary that you actually?
Okay. So you should know what chametz it is that we'll talk in a moment about exactly what we're going to eat on Shabbat. But you'll say, I'm selling all the chametz with the exclusion of that which I need for Shabbat. Right, but you should know, you should have it set aside in a certain area for various reasons.
We're going away, we're going to a hotel.
Okay.
We're leaving Friday morning, so apparently that simplifies everything for us because we're not going to be home Friday, we're not going to be home Shabbos. And so whatever the hotel does, we're okay with it?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, so we'll get in a moment. The next topic we're going to talk about, this is the main things that everybody wants to know, is the Sudot Shabbat. And we have to distinguish here between the first two meals and Sudah Shlishit. If we have Sudah Shlishit, how we do Sudah Shlishit. But yeah, what I can tell you is this, that it's one thing in a private home, right? If I keep a little bit of chametz in a hotel, there's absolutely no way. In a hotel, everything is kasher from before Shabbat. From the moment that Shabbat comes in, it is all 100% kasher Pesach. What are you going to do about lechem mishnah? We'll get there in a moment. But there will not be any chametz. There will not be any chametz in the hotel. That is that's clear. Okay.
So we do bitul as well. If you're not going to be at home for Shabbat, you do bitul on Friday as well.
So good. So that's a good point. If you're not going to eat any chametz on Shabbat, so you may as well do the bitul on Friday. Yeah, that's there's no problem with that.
The bitul is on my chametz.
Correct. So
I can do a bitul, and then whatever I have at the hotel, they'll take.
Right, there won't be chametz in the hotel. That's what I'm saying. If you know that Friday. And we'll talk in a moment why not everybody can do this. But if you know that on Friday morning, when you go and burn the chametz, you aren't going to be consuming any more chametz until after Pesach, say the bitul there and then, you won't forget, and that's fine. Okay, let's talk now about the Sudot Shabbat. Okay, because we still have to eat on Shabbat. We still want to eat on Shabbat. And essentially, we have two options. We could either eat with chametz, or we could eat everything kosher Pesach. And there are going to be difficulties with both of these. This is where everybody starts to get terrified. Okay, before we get to Surah Shlishit, and I'll tell you why. Let's assume we're at home for a moment. The hotel's a different passion. But if you're at home, if you're going to eat chametz at your Sudot Shabbat, again, I'm not talking about Surah Shlishit. We're talking still before 10 o'clock in the morning on Shabbat morning. You can't eat chametz anymore. So we're talking about dinner. We're talking about breakfast, which is lunch, Surah Shlishit. If you're going to eat chametz, number one, you're going to get crumbs all over the place. Okay, that's not recommended. Number two, which kelim are you going to use? If you're eating chametz, you can't use the Pesach pots and pans. You're going to use the chametz pots and pans. Well, then how are you going to wash them out? You have a problem with washing out. How are you going to heat up your food? You've kashered your hot plate, you've kashered your stove, your oven, whatever. Now you're going to put chametz in it? Okay, so this is a problem. Why do we get into this discussion in the first place? Why don't we just say, forget about it, no chametz, no bread, no anything? Well, so the Shabbat, in order for it to be so that Shabbat, you have to have bread. What's halachically bread? It doesn't have to be bread. Could be matzah. But hang on a second. How do we eat matzah on Erev Shabbat, on Erev Pesach? The Yerushalmi says that on the day, well, we have a minhag, there are different customs. Some of the minhag already not from Rosh Chodesh. Some of the minhag already from a month before, not to eat matzah. The reason why we don't eat matzah before is we want to eat the matzah of the Seder night, the Te'avon. Right? You want to really look forward to it, look forward to the taste of matzah. If you've eaten matzah the day before, even if you haven't eaten matzah the day before, but it's certainly if you've eaten matzah the day before, you're probably not looking forward to it. So the Yerushalmi says, no, you can't have. So we can't have bread. Well, technically speaking, this is more of a problem when we get to Sudah Shlishit, but at least for dinner, right? So we can't have bread for practical reasons. We can't have matzah for halachic reasons. So what are we? And we can't have bread for halachic reasons either. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And again, I'm not talking about Sudah Shlishit yet. That's a separate thing. I want to just figure out first dinner and lunch. So one option which the poskim suggests, and this is probably what they'll do in the hotel, is to use what's called matzah ashira. Matzah ashira, which literally translates as rich matzah, right? Matzah is called lechem oni, which is poor man's bread. Why is it called lechem oni? Because it has two ingredients, flour and water. That's it, nothing else. And we know, the Gemara tells us, you put flour and water together, what happens? They start to become chametz within a time limit, generally accepted, 18 minutes, might be longer, might be less, whatever. But that becomes chametz. Matzah ashira, it's called rich matzah. It has other things inside. It has fruit juice. It has honey, wine, whatever. Sorry? Eggs, right, as well. Now, what is, first of all, what is the din of matzah ashira on January? So what we say is this. When you have, and it comes out of the Gemara as follows. When you have just flour and water, we know that within a certain amount of time, that is going to become chametz. When we have other liquids inside, what's clear from the Gemara is that this matzah shira you cannot use for the mitzvah of matzah and leila seder. That is 100% clear. Exactly why that is less clear. But the understanding is that when you have these different materials, different components, different liquids in it, it's not going to become chametz in the same amount of time that flour and water. The understanding is, one understanding is that if this matzah shira actually will not become chametz. Okay, I'm not getting now into that. There's a book actually which was written. I think it's called Matzah Shira by somebody a few years ago. He's also a scientist, and he went through and he tried to reconcile all the sugyas scientifically, chemically, halachically, etc. Fascinating discussion. Not for now, but the point is, the bottom line halachically is Matzah Shira. We assume that if it doesn't have water, it just has fruit juice, eggs, or flour, whatever, that it's not going to become chametz. Certainly, it's not going to become chametz in the amount of time that ordinary matzah, ordinary flour and water would. Okay? And the Gemara learns out that only that which could become chametz but doesn't is what you can use to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah on Leila Seder. That's why tzashra you can't fulfill. What's the problem? The problem is this: that if it's just flour and fruit juice, whatever, then it won't become chametz. But if you're flour and eggs. But if you add a bit of water to that, even if you add a drop of water to it, then we say not only will it become chametz, but it will become chametz faster than ordinary matzah. How long will it take to become chametz? We don't know, but it will happen faster, so we have to be concerned. So therefore, we're concerned, number one, that maybe there was a bit of water that was added in as well, and then actually it might become chametz. So this is the way that we view matzah shira. So this is a machloket between Ashkenazim and Sfardim. The Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Samech Bet, this is the din about, it's called Din Mei Peilot Imach Mitzin. Essentially, this is the Siman that tells us about Matzah Shira. He says, Mei Beitzim Usham Mashkim, if you have eggs and other liquids, Kulam Have Bichlal Mei Perot. Okay, these are considered Mei Perot. Maybe before that, what the Shulchan Aruch says like this. He says, "Mei perot belo mayim ein machmetzim klal." If you just have fruit juice, but you don't have water, it won't become chametz. ומותר לאכול בפסח מצה שנרשב מפירות, אפילו שאתה כל היום. It says no limit, no 18 minutes or whatever. That's what we call matzah shira. According to Shulchan Aruch, it's not chametz, it's kosher. The Ramah says, ובמדינות אלו אין נוהגים לנוש במי פירות. Says in our place, our minhag is not to use fruit juice, etc. ואין לשנות, and you should not deviate from this minhag, אם לא בשעת הדחק לצורכי חולה או זקן הצריך לזה. Okay, says the Ramah, the elderly, infirm, somebody who's unable to eat matzah for health reasons, and all that they're able to is this matzah shira, which is softer, whatever. So then we could use it in extenuating circumstances. In other words, it's not that it's definitely chametz. We are concerned. We are concerned that maybe Mei Perot works differently. We're concerned maybe water was added. At the end of the day, we're concerned about it, and therefore we would not allow it under normal circumstances on Pesach. Okay, so that is matzah ashira. So at the end of the day, how do we view matzah ashira? For Ashkenaz, for Sfardim, especially if it has a good hechsha, it's kosher. It's kosher. You can't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with it. Now, the fact that you can't fulfill the mitzvah of matzah with it means that when we said you can't eat matzah on Erev Pesach, this would not apply. We're talking about the matzah which you could fulfill the mitzvah of Leila Seder. Matzah shira, you cannot. So according to Sfardim, you're okay. According to Ashkenazim, you're okay, so long as we're at the time when you're allowed to eat chametz. Okay, we'll talk about it in a moment in terms of what kelim. So, but what comes out of this is that Friday night, Shabbat morning, before 10 a.m., you'd be allowed to eat matzah shira, and you could use that, and that could be your lechem mishnah, and that's if you don't want to get things complicated with chametz, etc. I'll get to the questions in one moment. For Ashkenazim, it's preferable still to use different kelim. You shouldn't put it in your Pesach because we do have a certain concern. So it's probably a better idea to use chad pa'ami or whatever. But at the end of the day, certainly b'di'evid, the matzah's cold, it's not being cooked, anything. So that would not be a concern of the pots and pans. There were two questions.
What about using pizza?
We'll get to that. Pizza or chametz, correct?
Doesn't give you
Any crumbs? Well, hopefully, yeah. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a moment. Yeah.
What do you do with the matzah ashira afterwards? The sale has already taken place, so you can't put it back in the cabinet, right? You can't put it in the hummus sticker cabinet. What do you do with it?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. You're saying, look, so I would say at the end of the day, again, the question is how do we view it? We don't view it as actual chametz because and the proof of that is the Ramah says that if it's a shat adchak, if it's an extenuating circumstance for an ill person, you could have it. So it would seem according to that owning it would not be. We don't view it as actual chametz. So you should put it away where you're not going to use it. But that's all. There is, by the way, there's another very, very interesting suggestion, and I think they may rely on this in the army and in the hotels as well, maybe. But this was a suggestion made by Rav Zolti. Rav Zolti was the Rav of Yerushalayim. And he said the following. He said, what is the matzah that I can't eat on Erev Pesach? It's the matzah that I could fulfill the mitzvah of Leila Seder. So that's why we say matzah shira is not there. What if I have ordinary matzah? Right? There's another condition. The matzah that we use, we have to use matzah shmura. There are two meanings to matzah shmura, but one of them is that the matzah has to be baked lishma. It has to be baked for the sake of fulfilling the mitzvah of Pesach with it. If I bake matzah, that is not lishma. If I make matzah for the sake of not fulfilling the mitzvah of Leila Seder, I can't use it to fulfill the mitzvah of Leila Seder. And therefore, could I use that matzah? Could I eat that on Erev Pesach? Okay, that was the suggestion. Again, most poskim would say at the end of the day, since the food itself, it has the same taste as the matzah, so I would say no. But in an extenuating circumstance, I can tell you that in the army, they would rely on this. The hotels, they may rely on it as well. But bottom line is, if you're in the hotel, the best solution, certainly for Friday night and Shabbat morning breakfast, is if you have the matzah ashira, the egg matzah, whatever, kosher, that would be preferable. I'll just read to you. There's a sefer, there's some books which are written, which are only relevant once in every few years. There's a book I saw a few years ago, Birkat HaChama. It's a bracha that we say once every 28 years. Somebody wrote a book, Birkat HaChama. Okay. So this is a book Rav Rimon wrote called Erev Pesach Shechal B'Shabbat, was relevant 4 years ago. It's relevant this year. It'll be relevant again in another 20 years. So he actually added in here a perek. There's a whole chapter about how to kasher your kitchen for Pesach, which even when Erev Pesach is not on Shabbat, still applies. So that's just so that the book would not be a once in 20 years. But he mentions here the different options. So I'll just read to you his summary. Right? We said one option is person doesn't want to mistabech with chametz. I don't want to bring any chametz in my house. I want to get all my chametz done and finished before Shabbat. Okay, beseder gamur. So then this is for you. So he says like this. He says according to the solution, you get matzah shira. He says to make sure it's got a good hechsher. Okay, there's different discussion here about how much matzah shira I have to eat, but I'm not going to go into that now. He says l'minhag Ashkenazim. So for Ashkenazim, chashuv l'sayem et achilat matzah shira ad sof zman achilat chametz. You have to finish eating this matzah shira until 10 a.m. in the morning. And therefore, this would not apply for Surah Shlishit, which we'll get to in a moment. Ideally, it's better that this matzah should not come into contact with our Pesach pots and pans, right? And after the meal, whatever's left, you put away. It doesn't have to be burnt, it doesn't have to be sold, but it has to be put away that we won't eat it on Pesach. Regarding the kelim, so he says you could eat this meal on your Klei Pesach. Again, for the Ashkenazim, better that the matzah doesn't come into direct contact with these kelim. But it's probably easier and more comfortable to use chad pami, to use disposables. Okay, so that is one option, matzah shira. What if you say to me, no, this matzah shira, this is too complicated, we're going to have some this. Either way, I don't want to have I don't want to eat matzah, any type of matzah, until we get to Leil HaSeder. I'm going to go still Shabbat. I want to have my last bit of challah and hummus. Okay, so what can we do? So obviously, the second option, therefore, that we have is, and again, we're talking about still the first 2 meals on Shabbat, is that you could use bread. You could use, you could have hamotzi. Again, you can't have the Sudat Shabbat without any form of bread. Here, the recommendation would be as follows. If I'm going to have an entire meal, like I said, an entire meal which is just on my chametz pots and pans, and how am I going to clean them up? Where am I going to eat them? When am I going to kasher the kitchen? How am I going to heat things up? That's a balagan, as we say. So that is not recommended. What is recommended is the following. Before Shabbat, clearly we've kashered our kitchen, we've transferred all our pots and pans, etc. Okay, the meal that I'm going to eat, either way, should be kosher Pesach food. Believe it or not, you can get a kosher Pesach chicken, you can get kosher Pesach potatoes, you can get all those things. Okay, so that would be just ordinary. Ideally, recommended would be to cook things in your Pesach pots and pans, and then before Shabbat, move it over into, because I'm going to be eating at the table now with bread or whatever, so move it into chad pa'ami or aluminium trays or whatever you can eat. You can eat of chad pa'ami for that. Now, somebody mentioned pitot. You can get pitot, you can get rolls. You'll see if you go to the shops here on Friday morning, all the bakeries will make very small chalot and pitot, etc. Because whatever I'm going to buy, whatever I'm going to use, I can't have any left over. So I should buy a small quantity of lechem mishnah. And then what you can do is you put either you can eat outside on the balcony, or you can put a tablecloth down, eat the bread at the beginning of the meal. After that, shake everything off, fold it all up, throw it away, and then eat on chad pa'ami, etc. In the morning, same thing. Well, one has to remember again. In the morning, when we finish eating chametz, so one needs to remember to do the bitul, as we've already said. One has to remember to go and clean, rinse out one's mouth or brush one's teeth or do whatever when one is finished. An interesting question which comes up is, can I start my meal, let's say my meal in the morning, can I start before 10 o'clock, start with the challah, with the lechem mishnah, right? Then do the bitul, whatever, and then carry on. So here we have a question, because normally we say the bracha of hamotzi lechem min haaretz at the beginning of the meal, and that exempts all the food that I'm going to be eating. But if I'm now dividing up my meal, that I'm eating bread before 10 o'clock, and I'm carrying on the same meal after 10 o'clock, wait a minute. How can the hamotzi lechem min haaretz that I said, how can that apply for the rest of the food? It's a different meal. So that becomes questionable. So that's not so clear. So therefore it's best to have it all finish that meal before, and then we can carry on eating later. I'll tell you what Rabbi Rimon suggests, which is a very, very logical suggestion. He has his idea for what you could do. We'll get to Surah Shlishit in a moment. But he says, again, Friday night, we don't have an issue. Friday night is normal. But he says in the morning, now, we are going to be davening here at 7 o'clock on Shachrit, on Erev Pesach. I told Rabbi Wine yesterday, so I'm tired already. So, but that's the reason for that. And there won't be a drasha, don't worry. So you can all come. There will not be a drasha on Erev Pesach. We go home because we have to finish eating by 10 o'clock. So everyone suggests like this. Just come to shul, just go home. Your first meal of the day, which is your second meal of Shabbat. We can have challah, whatever we have, salads, whatever. Right? It's a late breakfast, whatever. Have that as a meal. Finish that. We bench at 10 o'clock. Okay. We then wait a couple of hours, and after the time of Mincha Gedolah, we have Surah Shlishit. Surah Shlishit will eat without bread. Okay, we'll talk in a moment about what we can have Surah Shlishit as well. But that will be the main meal. It will actually be lunch, but we'll call it Surah Shlishit. And then that way we have the whole day spread out, and it's easy enough. So let me just read you the summary here of this what he calls Sikum Pitaron Bet. If somebody wants to have bread, he says like this. He says, "Ochlim lechem besudat Shabbat." We can eat bread. Shulchan Aruch actually says when Erev Pesach is on Shabbat, you keep a little bit of bread for the two meals. Okay, it's still preferable to have cooked your Shabbos meal, not the bread, in your Pesach pots and pans. If we eat and at the table we use chad pa'ami, so then we can have our bread or whatever. Alternatively, he says you could eat from your Klei Pesach if you want, and you just have the bread at the beginning of the meal. לברכת המזון ישימו השולחן מעט לחם בשקית, או חתיכת מצה, ובמקרה זה עדיף לאכול את הלחם על מפה חד פעמית. Normally we have bread on the table when we say ברכת המזון. So if you have in a bag, or you have a piece of matzah, that's fine. And then we fold everything up, throw away the mapa, shake off our clothes, and go wash out our hands and our mouths, right? Or you could eat in a different room. Again, if you have a balcony or something like that, so then it's much more convenient. You just eat the bread on the balcony, and you sweep it up, and that's all done. What do you do if you have bread left over at the end of the meal? That's the problem. So the best thing is buy a small amount so that you won't have anything left over. Because now, if we wait until after the 5th hour, I can't own chametz. If I now take that bread and just throw it in the bin, again, if I take the bread before Friday, whatever, and I throw it away, that's fine. But now I've got it in my house, it's in my possession, I can't, so either what the poskim write is you could crumble it up and flush down the toilet, or you can pour a little bit of bleach or something on it and then throw it away. It's nifsar, it's not ro'oi la'achilat kelev, and we're done. But best to avoid getting into that. Okay, so that's the first two meals on Shabbat. I mentioned about continuing the Sudah after bread. He has also a section in here. What happens if a person woke up late on Shabbat morning? I mean, you didn't wake up late, you just woke up the normal time. But since davening so early, and so there's a question here, what if a person wakes up and they don't have enough time now to go and daven all of Shabbat and to be able to eat? Could they eat before, whatever? So he goes, yeah. He says, if you have enough time to say Birkat HaTorah, Baruch She'amar, Asher Yishtabach, Kriyat Shema, Brachot Tfilat Amidah, and then you can go and do Kiddush and eat a meal. So you should do that, and you can daven Musaf afterwards. Okay, but best to try and wake up on time every day, but especially on this day. All right, we've managed to get through our first two meals. The big question is, everybody wants to know as well, what about Sudah Shlishit? Now, Sudah Shlishit on this Shabbat, we have a few difficulties. First off, there's a specific time in which we eat Sudah Shlishit. You can't have Sudah Shlishit in the morning. Right, that's just the time of Sudah Shlishit on an ordinary Shabbos is from Mincha time and on. It doesn't mean that we necessarily have to have daven Mincha before, although according to Sfardim, and really L'katchila, you should daven Mincha before you've eaten Sudah Shlishit. For Ashkenazim, there's what to rely on, but we have to eat before. Sudah Shlishit has to be after the time of Mincha. On Erev Pesach, we have another complication. Since it's Erev Yom Tov, we can't start a meal after the 10th hour of the day. So we have a very narrow window in terms of the time which we can eat Sudah Shlishit. I'll tell you the times this year. Right, the 10th hour would kick in at about 3:52, right? So you have to have started the meal before that. And the time of Mincha Gdolah and Sudah Shlishit is at 1:10. So it's only those 2 hours in the middle of the day. That's when we have to eat Sudah Shlishit. But the bigger problem is the time when we can eat Sudah Shlishit is after the time of Mincha. So that's already after the time when I can no longer eat Chametz. Right? So I can't eat Chametz and I can't eat Matzah. So what am I going to do? So one option is, and this works for Sfaradim, is to have Matzah Shira. Matzah Shira. Again, for Ashkenazim, we said we can have Matzah Shira in the morning if we want, or the night before. But we can't have Matzah Shira for Sudah Shlishit, because this is at the time when you can't have Chametz, so we're concerned that it might be Chametz. Okay. The second option is to have Sudah Shlishit without bread. Okay. Generally speaking, it's highly, highly preferable, according to many poskim, it's even obligatory to have Sudah Shlishit with bread to wash. But if you can't, there's no possibility, and therefore that's what you do. A third option, which is the Marami Rottenberg, he says the following. He says, I have an issue in terms of the time for Sudah Shlishit, and I have an issue in terms of what I can eat for Sudah Shlishit. So what he would do is the following. He says, in the morning, before the time when you have to stop eating chametz, he would have 2 meals, twice. He would wash twice, and in both of those he would have bread, okay? So that way you fulfilled Sudah Shlishit with bread, the third meal. But on the other hand, the meal was too early, right? So then he would go and he would eat again later in the day, fruit and whatever. So Mima nafshach. If the problem of if Sudah Shlishit has to be with bread, I've had it with bread. If it has to be later, so I've eaten later, but without bread. Okay. Nowadays that's not so practical because again, to go and to wash twice, to come home after shul at 8:30 in the morning, and then to wash twice before 10 o'clock, probably not. So generally speaking, what we rely on is the second option, which that we have Sudah Shlishit in the afternoon. Like I said, the easiest way is you have a light breakfast sort of in the morning where you wash. And then you have your meal in the afternoon. You can have with mezonot. How can you have mezonot? You can have kneidlach or something like that. You can have fried, cooked foods that have got matzah meal in them. There's a separate issue in terms of cakes, etc., or other baked goods that have got matzah meal, matzah flour in them. Would that apply? Would that fall into the same category as matzah that we don't want to eat on Erev Pesach? So the klal is, the more similar it is to matzah, the more problematic it's going to be. So generally speaking, the baked goods we try and avoid. But again, if there's nothing else to eat, one has what to rely on. But one should have kneidlach or something like that, so you can have the mezonot, and that way we can fulfill Sudah Shlishit. This is the one Shabbat in a year, or in 20 years, whatever, Ashkenazim. We can't wash at Sudah Shlishit because we can't wash. There's just no way. There's no way to do it. There is a source. Many people quote this. The Magen Avraham says, he quotes in the name of the Zohar. He says that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai how would he fulfill Sudah Shlishit on this Shabbat? With a Dvar Torah. He says you can fulfill Sudah Shlishit with Divrei Torah. The Gra learns from that actually on this Shabbat there is no obligation of Sudah Shlishit. Okay, whatever it is, but that's like I said, that's what we do. We would eat that meal without washing. For Sfaradim, the easy thing to do is Matzah Shira. But for Ashkenazim, you can't wash for Sudah Shlishit, so that's what's that. Again, one should eat early enough so that one's not starting a meal very, very close to the Seder. But at the same time, it's a good idea to eat so that one's not hungry and one's not starving coming into Seder. Okay, that's more or less Shabbat. In terms of Pesach, so a couple of things to note when Pesach falls out on Motzei Shabbat. First thing is chronologically Shabbat HaGadol. So Shabbat HaGadol is the Shabbat that's before Pesach. That's the name, the Haftarah of Shabbat HaGadol we would read then, and that is on Erev Pesach. Nonetheless, the Drashat Shabbat HaGadol, right? The reason is that it's brought in the Poskim that the reason for the Drashat Shabbat HaGadol is in order to prepare for Pesach. Once upon a time, the drasha was very, very halachic. Nowadays, that's not the minhag necessarily. But if you're going to give the drasha Shabbat HaGadol just a few hours, a few moments before Pesach comes in, that's too late. And therefore, the drasha is brought the week earlier. That's why this Shabbat will be the drasha Shabbat HaGadol, even though Shabbat HaGadol itself is next Shabbat. Okay? That's a bit confusing. The second thing is also Hagalat Kelim, by the way. If a person is going and is kashering Kelim, there are various reasons why we cannot do Hagalat Kelim on Erev Pesach, certainly not after the 5th hour. But since that Friday is still not Erev Pesach. So if you've got nothing better to do, you can go on Friday and you can still do a Hagalat Kelim if you've left it to the last minute. In terms of preparation for the Seder, it's very important to remember that you can't prepare anything on Shabbat. We cannot prepare from Shabbat to Yom Tov. When Yom Tov falls out on Erev Shabbat, we can prepare from Yom Tov to Shabbat with an Eruv Tavshilin, but when it falls the other way around, because Shabbat is a higher level of Kedusha than Yom Tov, so we cannot prepare anything from Shabbat to Yom Tov. Therefore, all the achanot for the Seder are making salt water and grating the horseradish and washing the lettuce and all those things one has to remember to do on Friday. And when it comes to even setting the table, etc., one can't do that on Shabbat. So one has to wait until Shabbat is out. When Shabbat is out, then one can light candles and one can set the table and do all those things, etc. What about sleeping? Sleeping on Shabbat. So you should sleep on Shabbat. It's recommended. Now Shabbat Tanug, and there's a mitzvah, and particularly on Erev Pesach, we're going to be up till very, very late. However, is that considered hachana? Is that considered preparation? So therefore, one shouldn't say explicitly, I'm going to sleep now, I'm going to rest so that I have energy for Seder night. Don't say that. Say, I'm going to sleep now because I'm tired. That's okay. And then one should have a rest on, one can have a rest on Shabbat. The other thing, which again, I won't get into too many details now, but it all appears in the Haggadah. But when Yom Tov falls out on Motzei Shabbat, so we do Kiddush, because the Seder night we do Kiddush, like we always do on Yom Tov, but we also have to make Havdalah. So how do we do Kiddush and Havdalah together? So have the same cup of wine. It's what's called Yaknehaz. Okay, you'll see on the schedule when it's printed for Pesach, it'll say Leila Seder, it'll say Mariv Halal, and then you go home and you do Yaknehaz. So what is Yaknehaz? That is an abbreviation for Yayin, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, and Zman. These are the 5 brachot, and this is the order that we do it. The Gemara is the discussion, there's different opinions, but this is where we pass halakha. So as you're doing it, the order of brachot is Yayin. We first say Brei Bragafen, then Kiddush, say the bracha of Kiddush, then we say the bracha of Ner, of Borei Morei Esh. So one has the candle, one can use the Yom Tov candles for that. Then Havdalah, we say the bracha of Havdalah, and then we say the bracha of Zman, which is Shechianu. As I say, it's all printed in the Haggadah. It's on the page that everybody usually skips over, right? It says when Seder falls out on Motzei Shabbat. So that is this year. Yeah.
If you're going to prepare for the Seder, you say, Baruch Hamavdil Mekodesh.
Yeah. So that's right. So once Shabbat comes out, once at the time, that's Motzei Shabbat. So if one is at home, one says Baruch Hamavdil Mekodesh LaKodesh, and that's when you can start preparing for Seder. If you are in shul, if you're davening, so we have the paragraph we say Vatodi'enu, which we add in. That's the Havdalah that we say in Tefillah, and that's in lieu of that. And then again, we say the bracha of Havdalah again at we're going to say Kiddush. Yeah. Okay, I think that's most of it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. Next week, we'll have another share. So I'll just let you know. Tomorrow, there is a lunch and learn. We don't want to get culinary expectations up too high. But for those who signed up, or even if you haven't signed up, you might have to bring your own bagel. But that will be tomorrow at 12:30. We're going to be talking about the Haggadah. It's very, very good to talk about the halachot, but also, we get to the night of the Seder night, and many times we haven't opened up the Haggadah yet, and we're reading it for the first time. We don't know what we're saying. So we're going to be discussing some ideas about the Haggadah tomorrow. Also, we have 2 weeks to prepare, and this is what I mentioned at the beginning. Having the Shabbat, it's a tremendous opportunity to have the time on Shabbat. There's lots of extra time because davening is early, etc. We don't just have to sleep, but we can go through the Haggadah and we can learn things. And again, that's not considered hachana. That's permitted. One's allowed to go through the Haggadah on Shabbat and learn for Pesach. So that share will be tomorrow. Next week, we'll have another share again in this time slot. We'll talk some more, a little bit more generally in terms of the halachot of Leila Seder, the Haggadah, 4 cups of wine, etc. Those kind of things. So thank you everybody for coming. There is now an opportunity not to sell me your chametz, but to appoint me a shaliach to sell your chametz. We can do that now or the other times that are listed on the schedule.